This is Dr. Needles, and he was never made. Well, wait, but if he was never made, then how could he be right here? That's because this one is actually a prototype. Dr. Needles is a placeholder name that Spirit Halloween came up with for a product that they would have released. The manufacturer YJ made him to be sold in 2020 for $200. But he never got released. He was supposed to be a part of the lineup of animatronics that Spirit Halloween sold in stores that year, and you could even see him in the concept art for the eventual jungle theme that they had in stores. In this early version of Dr. Needles, he had 2 gloves with needles for fingertips, really embodying the tickle monster. It's said that his fingertips were supposed to move, and he looked to be like a pair with Miss Mercy, an animatronic that was actually sold that year. A prototype of this early version of Dr. Needles was created to try and show it off in a meeting at Spirit Corporate, but the idea was rejected, and he was reworked in 2021. His goggles and belt were taken away in this version, and his left arm was replaced with a surgical saw blade, with a weird spinning light effect to try and give the illusion of movement. His right arm moves, but his fingers notably don't. And finally, his body turns left and right, the kind of standard for most animatronics. His frame was built with spare parts, bent poles, duct tape, and shoes that were shared by Headless Help and Fenced-In Zombie. This was the new and improved Dr. Needles, complete with Spirit Halloween's own notes. This 2021 build of him was brought to another meeting at Spirit Halloween. And you know, they weren't such a big fan of it after it was put into practice. So they rejected Dr. Needles for another year. There is one more version of him, and we only have one image of this one. This was a third build made for 2022. We can assume that since he never released since then, that the third time was not in fact the charm, and he was rejected for a third and final time. The only notable differences with this 2022 model is that his head and hand are now facing down, and his cloak is a lot more white, untextured, and thin because you can see light coming through it. Now, since then, these prototypes ended up being forgotten and unused, aside from his head being used as a placeholder on other prototypes as seen in this image. This guy is everywhere. And Spirit Halloween went with another doctor idea named Dr. Illume, released in 2022, the same year that Dr. Needles got rejected for the last time. Dr. Illume is pretty cool though. There are these animations that show Dr. Illume performing experiments in stores. Now just imagine if Dr. Needles had released instead of him, and it would have been Dr. Needles in those animations. But amidst the smoke and fog, someone in the Haunter community actually got their hands on the 2021 prototype of Dr. Needles, and that man's name is Halloween Haunter. I know, that name leaves no questions to be asked. Now get this, someone just kind of had a truckload of Halloween prototypes and sold them to private collectors. At least this is as much as I know. And Halloween Haunter was one of those private collectors since he had dibs on Dr. Needles since very early on. Kind of an early adopter of loving this character. You know, so it kind of just boils down to, I know a guy. That's really the only way that you can get your hands on such weird, obscure things. And that 2021 Dr. Needles is the exact one that I have right here. Now, the strangest thing about this prototype, I would say, is the audio. Take a listen. Weird, right? That's because the audio that he uses is actually not his at all. It was pulled straight from this tombstone decoration. They must have just had that audio rip on hand and used it as a placeholder on Dr. Needles so that he would kind of, you know, work before they got to the point of the process where he would have his own original voice and written lines. Something else strange and notable about this prototype, since there's lots of these little things that kind of prove that it's not a produced animatronic and just kind of a working thing, it has visible polygons on his head because this was a digital sculpt that was 3D printed, and then his face was hand painted since it wasn't on an assembly line or anything. So his face looks a lot better than it would if he were produced. So this face of Needles is probably the best that he would look, you know, other than the polygons and print lines under his chin. Now it is still possible that he comes back even after all this time, because Spirit Halloween is known to revisit old ideas, even ones of seemingly canceled prop. Like how Toothy the Clown was seen in some dark photo of Spirit Corporate, a very creepy photo I might add, and fans wanted him back enough, and then then Spirit just released a produced model of him. Now, the only prototype of Dr. Needles that we have is this one, which means that they still have the 2022 version of him in some kind of factory somewhere, which means they can still go forward with him. But, you know, who knows what will happen. Spirit is largely unpredictable. They'll bring back super random items that nobody asked for. But Dr. Needles is a super cool look into how these things are made and the process that it goes through, and just kind of a generally elusive, rejected character from Spirit Halloween. But I want to thank Halloween Haunter for letting me borrow this animatronic and make this video just kind of describing his whole story and journey. And if his idea is proposed once again, let's hope he doesn't get rejected for a fourth time. And I will see you in the next video. Bye bye!